Brianna, at 23, never imagined her life would take such a bitter turn. Living in a small apartment in the suburbs of New York, she worked tirelessly as a waitress at a local restaurant, struggling to support herself and her mother, who was gravely ill. Since her mother's diagnosis, her savings had quickly vanished on treatments and medicines that seemed never-ending. Every day was a silent battle. That morning, things got worse. The essential medication to keep her mother alive had run out, and Brianna, with a heavy heart, knew she didn't have a single cent left to buy it. Desperate, she called several pharmacies, begging for credit, but no one wanted to extend a hand to someone with a history of debt. At work, while serving customers with a forced smile, her mind raced. There were no more options. That night, after all the customers had left and the restaurant had closed, Brianna approached the cash register. Her hands were trembling. The day's earnings were right in front of her. She knew it was wrong, but a persistent voice in her mind reminded her, "My mom needs this to survive." With one last glance around to make sure no one was watching, Brianna opened the drawer and took enough money to cover the cost of the medicine. Her heart pounded as she shoved the bills into her pocket. But she wasn't alone. Christian McJohnson, the restaurant owner and a successful millionaire, was upstairs reviewing the financial records. When he heard the cash register open, his instincts made him quietly descend the stairs. As he rounded the corner, he caught Brianna in the act. "What the hell are you doing?" Christian's deep voice echoed through the empty restaurant, cutting through the air like a sharp blade. Brianna froze. Slowly turning around, her face was pale as a sheet, her eyes wide with pure terror. She couldn't utter a single word. Her body felt heavy, as if the ground beneath her was about to give way. Christian approached with steady steps, tension evident in every movement. "I'm calling the police," he stated coldly, his eyes filled with icy resolve. He was a ruthless businessman, and he didn't tolerate betrayal from anyone. Tears streamed down Brianna's face. The last thing she wanted was to be arrested. She knew that if that happened, her mother wouldn't survive. She dropped to her knees, pleading, "Please, Mr. McJohnson, I'm not a thief. I just needed the money for my mother's medicine. She's really sick." I didn't know what else to do. Her voice cracked, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Christian remained silent for a long time, watching the young woman cry in front of him. He was used to people trying to take advantage of his wealth, but something about this situation felt different. He noticed the sincerity in Brianna's desperation, the fear in her eyes, and the genuine anguish in her voice. "And what do you think I should do now?" he finally asked, his words sounding like a challenge. Brianna quickly wiped her tears, trying to steady her breathing. "Please don't report me," she begged. I'll work double, triple if I have to. I'll pay back every cent, I promise. But I can't be arrested. My mom has no one else but me. Please give me this chance." Christian stared at her for a few more seconds before letting out a long sigh. He wasn't known for his patience, but there was something about this girl's determination. He saw a spark of intelligence in her eyes, a sharpness that intrigued him in some way. "All right, Brianna," he said slowly, his words dripping with caution. "You'll work here until you pay back every cent, but there's one condition. I'll be keeping a close eye on you. One slip, and you'll be handed over to the police without a second thought." Brianna nodded frantically, unable to believe what she had just heard. "Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much." As Christian walked away, Brianna felt a temporary sense of relief, but she knew the price of her freedom would be steep. From that moment on, her life would change drastically, and she had no idea how closely Christian would become involved in her life in the days to come. In the following days, Brianna worked with an intensity that surprised everyone at the restaurant. Every customer she served was an opportunity to prove her worth, to show she was deserving of the second chance Christian had given her. But despite her tireless effort, guilt consumed her from within. Every time she saw the restaurant owner, her heart raced, fearing that he might change his mind at any moment. Christian McJohnson, on the other hand, watched the young woman closely. Since the incident, he had kept her under surveillance, still suspicious. But there was something about Brianna that intrigued him. She was different from other people who had crossed his path over the years. It wasn't just the difficult situation she was in, but the way she handled it. Silent, resilient, willing to sacrifice herself for others. He saw her dealing with customers, always polite, but with a melancholy that followed her like a shadow she couldn't shake off. One night, after everyone had left the restaurant, Christian approached Brianna. She was alone, cleaning the tables in silence, her body exhausted, but her movements still precise. "Brianna," he called, his voice unexpectedly soft, breaking the silence of the place. She quickly lifted her head, stopping what she was doing. "We need to talk." She swallowed hard, nervous, but she approached him. Every encounter with Christian made her tense. She never knew what to expect. "I've been watching you," he began, leaning against one of the tables. "And I have to admit, you've been working harder than anyone who's ever been here. But I still want to understand something." He paused for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. "Why didn't you tell me about your situation earlier? About your mother?" Brianna felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was a simple question, but one loaded with weight. She looked away, unable to meet his gaze directly. I didn't want to bother anyone with my problems," she replied in a whisper. "I've always dealt with things on my own. My mom's been through so much, and I just wanted to handle things my way." But her voice broke, and she needed a moment to pull herself together. "I failed. I didn't want people to see me as weak or seeking pity." Christian frowned, intrigued by her response. He knew there was more behind her facade of strength. "Do you think asking for help is weakness?" he asked, his voice firmer now. Brianna took a deep breath, forcing herself to be honest. "In life, people like me can't afford to look weak. If we fall, no one's there to pick us up. I've seen it happen to my mom. She was a strong woman until her body gave up. And now, it's up to me to be strong for both of us." She raised her eyes, this time meeting Christian's gaze. I can't fail. Not anymore." Christian was silent for a moment. Those words stirred something in him more than he wanted to admit. He, who had built an empire on self-sufficiency and hard work, saw a distorted version of himself in this young woman. Brianna was trapped in a constant struggle, believing her only option was to fight alone. "And how's your mother?" he asked, his voice softening again, almost gentle. He had never thought to take an interest in his employees' lives, but something about Brianna made him want to know more. Brianna hesitated, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hold back. "She's getting worse," she admitted, her voice strained. "The medicine I bought with the money I took, it helped for a while, but it's not enough. I don't know how much longer she has." Christian felt a tightness in his chest. He was a businessman, used to dealing with numbers and results, but this situation was something he couldn't control. It was personal, and he wasn't used to getting involved in other people's problems. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" he asked again, as if he couldn't grasp the logic behind her silence. Brianna shrugged, a look of resignation on her face. "What difference would it make? I'm just an employee. My life doesn't affect yours. And besides, the last thing I wanted was to seem like an opportunist." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was firmness in her words. "I don't expect you to do anything for me or my mom. I just wanted a chance to make things right." Christian observed her in silence for a long moment. There was something impressive about this girl. She had been caught stealing, but instead of making excuses or justifying herself, she took responsibility in a way few people would. She wasn't looking for anyone's sympathy. All she wanted was to work and redeem herself. That intrigued him. "You're stronger than you think, Brianna," he finally said, his voice low but filled with meaning. "But no one should carry the weight of the world alone. Sometimes you need help, and you're going to need more than just hard work to take care of your mom." Brianna blinked, surprised by his words. Was Christian McJohnson, the cold and distant millionaire, offering her help? She didn't know how to respond, her heart racing. "I'll see what I can do," he added before turning to leave. "But don't think this gets you off the hook. You still owe me. And I'll be expecting the same level of work, if not more." Brianna nodded silently, still stunned. As she watched him walk away, she realized that her life had taken an unexpected turn. Christian McJohnson was far from being the man she thought he was. And whether she liked it or not, their fates had become more intertwined than either of them could have imagined. The office was large, with a mahogany desk dominating the space, surrounded by shelves full of business books and reports. The wide windows let in natural light, creating a contrast between the refined environment and the rest of the restaurant. Christian settled behind the desk, gesturing for Brianna to sit in the chair in front of him. She felt her heart race as she sat down. She didn't know what to expect. He looked serious, as always, but there was something different in his eyes, something she couldn't quite figure out. "Today, I want you to start with something simple," he said, sliding some documents toward her. "These are sales reports. I want you to analyze the numbers and tell me what you notice. Pay attention to the details." Brianna took the papers, not really understanding why he wanted her opinion. She had no experience with that sort of thing. "I don't know anything about sales reports, Mr. McJohnson," she admitted, embarrassed. Christian just gave a small smile. "That's why you're here. I want you to learn. Don't worry about making mistakes. The important thing is to start understanding how the business works beyond what you see on the floor." She took a deep breath and started looking at the numbers. Her mind was quick. She had always been good with simple calculations, but she had never had the chance to deal with something this complex. As she analyzed the spreadsheets, she began to see small patterns: busier days, peak hours, fluctuations in orders. To her surprise, she found it more fascinating than she'd expected. Christian watched her silently. He knew there was something special about this young woman. Brianna was smart, much more than she gave herself credit for, and he was determined to make her realize that. With every passing moment, he grew more intrigued by her determination to handle such a difficult situation without ever asking for pity.
She didn't want to be saved.
She wanted to survive on her own, and that drew him in. After a while, Brianna looked up. "I think I see a trend here. On weekends, the orders for main dishes are much higher, but during the week, it's mostly drinks and quick appetizers. This suggests people are short on time during the weekdays, maybe because of work. Could we adjust the menu to optimize what we sell during those hours?" Christian smiled slightly, impressed. "You picked that up quicker than I expected." "Yes, that kind of adjustment could increase our profits during the week." "Good job, Brianna." She blinked, surprised by the praise. She wasn't used to receiving recognition, especially for something she had just started doing. "Thank you," she said awkwardly, still holding the reports in her hands. "That's exactly what I meant when I said you had potential," Christian continued, leaning back in his chair. "You think you only know how to wait tables, but you have a sharp mind. You just need to learn to trust yourself more." Brianna lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of his words. No one had ever seen her that way. To everyone, she was always the poor girl, the waitress. But Christian saw something more, and that made her feel different, stronger. "I'll be honest," she started hesitantly. "It still feels strange to me. All of this. Being here, with you teaching me these things. I always thought my life would be simple. Work, pay the bills, take care of my mom. I never imagined doing something like this." Christian leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "And that's what I want you to understand, Brianna. Life doesn't always follow the plan we make. Sometimes opportunities show up in unexpected ways. What you do with them is what defines your future." She remained silent, absorbing those words. There was an undeniable truth in them. In the past few months, life had thrown obstacles at her she never thought she'd have to face. And now, unexpectedly, she stood before an opportunity she never thought she'd have. "You're right," she said finally, raising her eyes to meet his. "I just need time to get used to all of this." Christian nodded. "Take all the time you need, but don't waste this chance. I see something in you, Brianna. And let me tell you something. I'm not the only one." She frowned, confused.
"What do you mean by that?"
He smiled slightly, mysteriously. "Just keep working hard. What I mean will become clearer with time." Brianna left the office that afternoon with her head spinning. What did Christian mean? And why was he so interested in helping her? Though he was hard to read, one thing was certain. Whatever was happening between them was just beginning. And somehow, she felt her life would never be the same. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Brianna. Her routine at the restaurant had changed drastically. During the day, she continued serving customers, but now, in her spare moments, she was called into Christian's office to help with administrative tasks. Although she was still unsure of her abilities, she was beginning to enjoy what she did. Each number she analyzed, every report she reviewed, brought a new understanding of how the business worked. She was learning, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. However, the growing closeness with Christian didn't go unnoticed. The other employees started talking. There were whispers in the locker room, curious glances in the hallways. Many wondered why Brianna, the quiet waitress who had always kept to herself, was suddenly spending so much time with the boss. She must be doing something to please the boss, she overheard one of her coworkers say while changing clothes. Nobody spends that much time in his office for no reason. Brianna felt her face flush with shame and anger when she heard that. She knew comments like this would come, but she hadn't expected them to sting so much. There was nothing improper between her and Christian, but trying to explain that to people who didn't understand the situation would be useless. So, silently, she left the locker room, her head down, trying not to let the malicious words ruin her mood. Later that day, when she was in the office, Christian noticed something was wrong. He watched Brianna as she typed some numbers into the computer and saw that her expression was more closed off than usual. "Is everything okay?" he asked, breaking the silence. Brianna hesitated. She didn't want to bring up more problems, especially when they involved meaningless gossip. "Everything's fine, Mr. McJohnson," she replied quickly, avoiding his gaze. Christian narrowed his eyes, clearly not convinced. "You're not good at lying, Brianna." He got up from his chair and walked over to the table where she sat. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me. I've told you before, I'm here to help." She let out a sigh, knowing it was pointless to hide. "It's just the comments in the restaurant," she admitted finally. "People think there's something going on between us. That's why I'm working here in the office." Christian gave a short laugh, not out of mockery, but disbelief. "People will always talk, Brianna. When you do something different, when you try to grow, there will be people who don't like it. And that says more about them than it does about you." Brianna nodded. "I know, but it's hard not to let it get to me. I've always been the invisible girl, the one no one notices. Now that I'm in the spotlight, it feels like they're just waiting for me to fail." Christian leaned against the table, crossing his arms, his serious gaze fixed on her. "Listen, Brianna. You don't owe anyone here anything. Your work, your dedication, your intelligence, that's what got you here. If these people can't see that, that's their problem, not yours. And if you keep worrying about what others think, you'll end up sabotaging yourself." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. He was right. As painful as it was, she knew she couldn't let other people's opinions dictate her path. "You're right," she said, her voice stronger. "I can't let it get to me." Christian nodded, satisfied. "That's the Brianna I want to see. Focused on what matters." He paused, watching her more closely. "I know you're used to fighting on your own, but remember, you don't have to do that here. We're on the same team." That last sentence echoed in Brianna's mind. On the same team. She had never felt like she was part of something bigger, always fighting her battles alone. But hearing that from Christian, someone who had always been at the top, made her question everything she thought she knew about the world she lived in. In the days that followed, Brianna decided to take Christian's advice. She ignored the looks, the gossip, and focused on her work. She threw herself even more into the task she was given, trying to learn as much as possible. But Christian, for his part, seemed determined to teach her everything he knew about the business, as if he saw her as a kind of apprentice. He challenged her every day with new tasks, new calculations, and she responded, growing with each challenge. One day, while reviewing some reports in the office, Christian watched her closely. He had noticed a change in her recently, more confident, more focused. He was proud of the progress she was making, but something inside him stirred whenever she was near. He admired her strength, her resilience, but he also felt something more, something deeper. He didn't know how to explain it, but he knew one thing for certain. Brianna was no longer just another employee to him. She was someone special. And that thought both excited and terrified him. She felt her cheeks warm up from the unexpected compliment. She was used to being underestimated by everyone, but Christian saw something in her that even she didn't know she had. I appreciate it, Mr. McJohnson. But sometimes it's hard to believe that I'm capable of something greater. All I've done my whole life is fight to survive. Christian gave a slight smile, almost imperceptible, but carrying an intensity Brianna couldn't fully grasp. And that's exactly why you're strong, Brianna. There's nothing more powerful than someone who fights every day and refuses to give up. But I want you to think about something. It's not wrong to want more than just survival. You deserve more. Those words hit her in a way she didn't expect. No one had ever told her she deserved more. Her father had disappeared when she was just a child, and ever since, her life had been about taking care of her mother, paying bills, and trying not to drown in debt. Dreaming seemed like a distant luxury. And what do you want, Christian? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. It was the first time she called him by his name, without the formal Mr. that she had always maintained between them. She was startled by her own boldness, but it was too late to take it back. Christian seemed surprised but not bothered. On the contrary, his smile widened slightly, revealing a satisfaction he rarely showed. Me? I've achieved a lot of what I wanted in life. I've built an empire. I have money, power, but somehow I feel like something's still missing. Brianna didn't know what to say. How could someone who seemed to have everything feel like something was missing? But when she looked into Christian's eyes, she saw a loneliness there, something he tried to hide behind his confident demeanor and his accomplishments. For a brief moment, she felt connected to him in a way she never imagined. The silence between them was broken by the ring of a phone. Christian returned to his desk, but the tension between them lingered in the air, palpable. While he answered the call, Brianna discreetly got up and left the office. She felt like she needed air. Her heart was still racing, and her thoughts were muddled. What was happening between them? She couldn't deny that something had changed. And for the first time in a long while, the future seemed like uncharted territory and, in a way, exciting. That night, when Brianna returned home, she found her mother in slightly better shape. The money Christian had provided for the medication was working, and it brought Brianna immense relief. But even so, as she cared for her mother, her thoughts kept returning to Christian. There was something about him that unsettled her, something that stirred her in a way she didn't know how to handle. As the night wore on, Brianna lay in bed, but sleep didn't come. Christian's words echoed in her mind. You deserve more than just surviving.
She had never thought of it that way.
She was so used to living day by day, fighting to keep her mother alive, that she never allowed herself to imagine a different future. But now, with Christian pushing her to think beyond the immediate, Brianna started to question herself. And as her thoughts wandered, a doubt began to surface. What did she really want from life? What did she really want from Christian? The days that followed brought a strange sense of tension, almost tangible, between Brianna and Christian. The office, once a neutral workspace, now felt charged with something deeper, a kind of energy that pulsed silently between the two. Brianna tried to focus on her tasks, concentrating on numbers and reports, but every time Christian was nearby, she felt a growing warmth in her chest, as if the gravity of his presence stirred every fiber of her being. She couldn't stop thinking about their last conversation. Christian's words, his veiled hints, stirred something inside her she hadn't known was there. There was an invisible thread connecting them, something she didn't know how to explain, but it manifested in every exchange of glances, in every silence that stretched for a moment too long. That afternoon, Christian called her to his office earlier than usual. There was something different in his tone when he spoke to her, something that made her tremble slightly as she gathered her things and made her way to the office that now seemed so familiar, yet at the same time, mysterious. When she entered, Christian was standing by the window, his back to her, watching the movement of the streets below. He seemed thoughtful, his hands clasped behind him, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Brianna closed the door softly, and the sound brought her back to reality. She was here, with him, once again caught in that magnetic field that grew stronger with each encounter. "Brianna," he began without turning around, his voice soft but carrying something deeper. "I've been thinking a lot over the past few days about us." She froze for a moment, not knowing what to say. "Us?" The word echoed in her mind. There was no us, not in the way he was insinuating. Christian slowly turned around, his eyes fixed on her. There was something different in his expression, a vulnerability Brianna had never seen before. He seemed less like the calculating businessman and more like a man carrying an invisible weight, a burden that brought him closer to her in ways neither of them fully understood. "You're not like anyone I've ever met," he continued, his dark eyes, like the night, full of unspoken intentions. "There's a strength in you, a light, something that draws me in, that makes me want to know more, to be close." Brianna felt her stomach churn. This wasn't what she expected to hear. She was there to learn, to grow as a professional, to pay off her debt. But now, this was heading in a direction she never imagined. And somehow, a part of her wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, unable to hold his gaze. The weight of it all was immense, and she felt that any word she said could change the course of their lives forever. Christian took a step forward, and she instinctively stepped back, though she didn't want to. There was something about him that pulled her in like a powerful magnet, but at the same time, the danger of this feeling was too clear. "You don't have to say anything," he replied with a soft, yet unsettling smile. "I just want you to know that I see something in you, Brianna. Something beyond what you see in yourself." She blinked, confused, emotions swirling like waves at high tide. "But the restaurant, the work? I'm here to learn, to pay what I owe." "I don't know if," she hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. "That's still the priority," Christian interrupted, his voice firm, but not cold. "But I can't ignore what I feel. I can't pretend nothing has changed between us. I can sense that you, too, wonder about what's happening here." Brianna felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. He was right. She did wonder. There were nights when she caught herself imagining what it would be like if this moment wasn't just about work, if there was something more between them. But she always pushed those thoughts away, convinced they were dangerous illusions, impossible to realize. "Christian, I don't know if this is right," she murmured, trying to keep control. "You're my boss, and I just want to do my job and take care of my mom. I can't let this distract me." Christian nodded, but there was something in his eyes that said he wouldn't give up so easily. "I understand," he finally said, stepping back slightly. "You have your priorities, and I respect that. But, Brianna, know that what I feel for you goes beyond what we can imagine. And it's not going to just disappear." She felt her heart race, as if his words had left a deep mark. What did this mean for them? How could she continue working alongside a man who clearly had feelings for her, and perhaps she for him? Without saying another word, Brianna left the office. Her steps were hurried, as if she were running from something chasing her, but the truth was, she was running from herself. Crossing the hall, she felt the eyes of the other employees, as always. But now, those stares seemed insignificant compared to what was happening inside her. Reality was different. Something far more complex and intimate was at play. Brianna let out a sigh of relief, but there was still a weight inside her. What she had said was true. She needed focus. She needed clarity. But at the same time, a part of her couldn't deny that something about Christian attracted her. He wasn't just her boss. He was a man who saw beyond her struggles, who believed in her in a way no one else had. And that shook her in a way that scared he. As Christian turned his attention back to the papers in front of him, a thought crossed Brianna's mind. What if she simply allowed herself to feel something more for him? What if, instead of fighting against this attraction, she embraced it? But immediately, she pushed that thought away. Her mother was still sick. She still had debts, responsibilities. There were more important things to be handled before she could even consider anything else. As she left the office, Brianna tried to focus on this new phase of her life. She was now the manager of the restaurant, and that brought with it a series of responsibilities. She needed to prove to Christian, to the staff, and mostly to herself, that she was capable. Every day was a battle to maintain control, not just of the restaurant, but also of her feelings. A few weeks later, Brianna was settling into her new role. She felt more confident, leading the team with firmness and clarity, but always with a human touch that earned the respect of the staff. There were still murmurs and curious glances about her relationship with Christian, but she ignored the rumors. She couldn't let that interfere. One night, after a long day of work, Christian showed up at the restaurant close to closing time. He didn't usually come by at that hour, and his presence surprised Brianna. She was at the counter, checking the cash register, when he approached her silently. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Christian asked, his tone softer than usual. There was something in his expression that seemed different. He wasn't there as the owner of the restaurant, but as someone with something personal to say. Brianna nodded, and the two of them went to the office where they had shared so many serious conversations in the past months. After closing the door, Christian turned to her, his eyes fixed on hers, as if he was trying to find the right words. "I know I asked that we not mix things up, and I've respected that," he began, his voice low, almost hesitant. "But I can't ignore what I feel, Brianna. I've tried to stay professional, tried to keep my distance, but it's impossible. I admire you, your strength, your intelligence. I've never met anyone like you, and no matter how hard I try, I can't pretend this is just a work relationship." His words hit Brianna like a storm. She knew something like this could happen, but hearing Christian confess his feelings with such sincerity moved her deeply. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She felt the weight of his gaze and the weight of her own feelings, the ones she had tried to bury, but that now seemed to rise to the surface. "Christian, she began, her voice trembling, emotions suffocating her. He stepped forward, his expression vulnerable. "I know you're focused on work and your mom. I don't want to complicate your life any further. But I need you to know how I feel, and that I'll be here, waiting, in case you feel the same. I'm not asking for anything now, but I wanted you to know that, for me, this is more than just work." Brianna felt her heart race. She looked at Christian, seeing in him not just the relentless businessman, but a man who, somehow, connected with her on a level no one else could. The walls she had built around herself were beginning to crumble, and the truth of her own feelings invaded her. "Christian," she whispered, not knowing how to finish the sentence. But before she could continue, he stepped back, as if wanting to give her space to process everything. "Think about it, Brianna. I'm not going to pressure you. I just wanted you to know." He nodded slowly, still stunned by what she had just heard. And as Christian left the office, leaving her alone with her thoughts, Brianna realized that her life was about to change once again. But this time, the change would be deeper than any she had faced before. Brianna stayed alone in the office after Christian left, feeling the silence weigh around her. His words still echoed in her mind. "I'll be here, waiting." She knew her emotions were on edge, but she was also trapped in an impossible dilemma. Everything she had done until that moment was to keep her mother alive, to survive in a world that seemed increasingly cruel. Now, suddenly, there was something new in her life, something she never could have anticipated: Christian and what he represented. That night, when she got home, Brianna found her mother weaker than usual. The woman was lying in bed, breathing heavily. Brianna's heart clenched, and she rushed to her mother's side, sitting in the chair next to her. "Mom, how are you feeling?" she asked, trying to hide the panic in her voice. "Just tired, dear," her mother replied, her voice weak, but a forced smile on her lips. "Don't worry, I'm fine." But Brianna knew that wasn't true. Her mother's health had been deteriorating rapidly, despite the medications Christian had helped buy. Each day seemed like another blow, and the fear of losing her grew with every moment. As she held her mother's frail hand, Brianna felt a mixture of despair and helplessness. "Mom, I'm trying. I'm working hard, and I'll get more money to take care of you. Everything will be fine," she said, tears threatening to roll down her face. Her mother gently caressed her hand, her gaze full of love and understanding. "You're already doing so much, my daughter. I know you've been working hard. I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for me. You deserve more." Those words echoed in Brianna's mind. You deserve more. Her mother had always known she was struggling, but now, it seemed like she was trying to tell her something deeper, something Brianna needed to hear, but didn't want to accept. What did she deserve? And what did that mean for her future? That night, as her mother slept, Brianna sat beside the bed, lost in thought. Christian had confessed his feelings for her, something that had thrown her into an emotional whirlwind. She felt something for him too, something that, until that moment, she had tried to ignore. But now, with everything on edge, she could no longer pretend that she wasn't confused and torn. She wondered if it was possible to reconcile her feelings for Christian with her responsibilities. There were so many variables at play: her mother, her job, her debts, and the fact that Christian was her boss. How could she allow herself to feel something for him when her life was filled with uncertainties? The next day, Brianna returned to work, but the tension between her and Christian was palpable. The two avoided addressing the issue that hung in the air, but it was impossible not to notice the discomfort in their exchanged glances. Christian, although keeping the distance he had promised, seemed always present, as if waiting for an answer she wasn't yet ready to give. The staff, as usual, murmured around the edges. The news that Brianna had been promoted to manager wasn't well received by everyone. Some insinuated that the promotion was linked to something more than just her hard work, and the gossip ran wild throughout the restaurant. Brianna pretended not to hear, but those words echoed in her mind, feeding her doubts and insecurities. One day, while Brianna was trying to solve a problem in the dining area, Christian appeared unexpectedly. He was more serious than usual, and she immediately sensed that something was wrong. He gestured for her to follow him to the office, and the two walked in silence, side by side. When they arrived, Christian closed the door, turning to her with a concerned expression. "I got a call from the hospital," he began, his voice heavy with concern. "Your mother was taken there. It seems she had a complication." The ground vanished from beneath Brianna's feet. Her heart raced, and a wave of panic swept over her body.
What?
"What do you mean?" I need to get there," she said, her voice trembling as she grabbed her things. Christian gently held her arm, trying to calm her. "I'll go with you. Don't worry about work now. This is what matters." Brianna had no time to argue. She just wanted to get to the hospital as fast as possible. On the way, the silence in the car was unbearable. Christian drove fast but cautiously, while Brianna tried to control the panic that gripped her chest. All she could think about was her mother and what she would do if she lost her. Her whole life had been dedicated to taking care of her, to keeping her alive. And now, it seemed like all that effort was crumbling before her eyes. When they arrived at the hospital, Brianna ran out of the car and rushed through the glass doors, desperate for news. Christian followed closely behind, watching her anguish with a mixture of concern and affection. In that moment, none of the barriers they had set mattered. All that mattered was being there for her. At the reception, Brianna barely managed to get the words out, asking for her mother. The nurse's face was somber, and that only deepened Brianna's fear. She was directed to a waiting area, where a doctor came shortly after. His face said everything before he even spoke. "I'm sorry. My mom is better," she said softly. "She's going to be okay." Christian smiled, genuinely relieved. "I'm glad to hear that, Brianna." "Really?" Silence fell between them again, but this time, it was different. There was something that needed to be said, and Brianna knew she couldn't keep running from it. She looked at Christian, her eyes locked on his, and finally, the words she'd been avoiding came out. "I don't know how to do this," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "My life has never given me space to think about myself, to think about what I want. It's always been about my mom, about surviving. And now, with you, I feel something, but I'm also scared." Christian moved a little closer, his eyes full of understanding and patience. "I'm not here to pressure you, Brianna. What I feel for you isn't going anywhere. And I know that whatever decision you make, I'll be here by your side. You deserve to live, not just survive." His words hit her hard. You deserve to live. It was exactly what her mother had told her, and now Christian was repeating it. For the first time, Brianna started to believe it. She deserved more than a life of sacrifices. She deserved to feel something deeper, something that made her truly feel alive. I want to try," she said finally, her voice steady, though the fear was still there. "I want to see where this leads us, but I need to take it slow. I'm still learning how to handle all of this." Christian smiled, a warm smile full of relief and admiration. He reached out his hand again, and this time, Brianna took it without hesitation. "We'll take it slow," he promised. "No rush. One step at a time." Brianna nodded, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel hope, not just for her mother's health, but for herself. The road ahead would be full of challenges, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Christian would be by her side, and together, they would figure out what the future held. She looked at him, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. There was still so much to say, so many battles to face, but in that moment, everything seemed possible. She didn't know what the future would bring, but finally, she allowed herself to believe she could be happy, that she could, indeed, live. That night, after the heartfelt conversation between Brianna and Christian, the silence that followed was far from uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was charged with a latent tension, almost palpable. Brianna felt her heart racing, her fingers still intertwined with Christian's. His eyes, so deep and intense, watched her with a gaze that left her breathless. The closeness between them seemed to grow with each passing second. Christian, without letting go of Brianna's hand, gently ran his thumb over her palm, as if trying to memorize the sensation of her touch. Brianna's breathing became uneven, and she felt her body respond to that simple gesture, as if every part of her was drawn to him. "Brianna," Christian murmured, his voice husky and low, as if he was struggling to maintain control. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and in that moment, there were no more barriers between what they felt. Everything they had repressed, all the doubts and fears that had held them back until now, seemed to vanish into thin air. Brianna knew something was about to happen, something that would change everything, and for the first time, she was ready. Christian leaned in slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He brought his other hand to Brianna's face, gently caressing her cheek. His touch was warm and soft, and she instinctively leaned into it, closing her eyes for a brief second, allowing herself to feel every detail. Without saying another word, Christian moved even closer, the heat of their bodies now so near that Brianna could feel his light scent mixed with her own nervousness. She opened her eyes at the exact moment his lips touched hers. Understood. The kiss wasn't just about desire, but a promise of something more, something lasting. Christian kissed Brianna with a passion she had never experienced before, as if every movement of his lips told her he was here to stay, that he would protect her from whatever came their way. Brianna felt the same, as if this kiss was the beginning of something greater, something neither of them was willing to let slip away. As the kiss deepened, time seemed to stop around them. The world outside, with all its problems and responsibilities, disappeared. All that mattered in that moment was the connection between them, the way their bodies and hearts understood each other without needing words. When they finally pulled away, both were breathless, but they didn't let go. Christian kept his hand on Brianna's face, his thumbs gently stroking her skin with tenderness, while his eyes met hers, full of silent promises. Brianna, still tasting the kiss on her lips, smiled softly, and Christian responded, letting out a quiet sigh. "I've waited so long for this," Christian confessed, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to kiss you, how much I want this between us to be real." Brianna felt a wave of warmth pass through her body again. She knew Christian was being sincere. What they shared was more than just an impulse, more than a fleeting desire. It was something that had been building slowly, day by day, in every conversation, in every glance exchanged. "I want that too," she replied, her voice soft but full of conviction. "I want to see what this means for us." Christian smiled, a genuine smile full of hope. He leaned in again, placing a gentle kiss on Brianna's forehead, a gesture of affection that spoke just as much as the passionate kiss before. "I'll be by your side, Brianna. Always," he promised, his voice firm and full of certainty. And in that moment, Brianna knew that, despite the challenges they would face, she wasn't alone anymore. There was something greater between them, something that bound them together irrevocably. And together, they would discover what the future held, one step at a time.